By the way, just a little bit of a note here. We only have 11 lectures for this class. We're practically halfway done. Okay, do you remember me telling you the very first day? I know it's sad, isn't it? I hate it when it ends, but unfortunately it has to. But do you remember me telling you guys? It goes fast. You think, oh, I got a whole month. It goes fast. 2 years goes fast. So just be ready for that. And that's why I warn you, buckle up. Well, I didn't say buttercup, but it goes very fast, and you got to be ready for that. Don't be caught off guard. Before you know it, you'll have graduated. All right, lecture 5, here we go. Number 1, a cool and groovy vocabulary thing. You know, anytime we see that periwinkle color, that means it is something that is on our what? Self-grade document, absolutely, which means it's something we're grading for, i.e. something you need to know. So, in terms of this vocabulary component here, deleting the history. Deleting the history is very important because basically what that does is it kind of frees up Maya from having to remember a lot of stuff that's really not necessary. Everything you do in Maya writes down like a total psycho. It makes a big long list of everything. And periodically we need to sort of empty that list and go, okay, we've moved beyond that. We need to get past it. You know, it's kind of like holding on to old issues. They kind of eat you inside. Well, they eat Maya inside too. And eventually Maya will do terrible things to you if you allow them to build up. Yes, it's called crashing. It's called files corrupting. It's called tools not working properly. A lot of stuff happens when you don't delete the history fairly frequently. For me, about every 15 minutes or so, I will save my file and I will save it with a number and a different number. So if I'm building a garbage can, you know, 15 minutes into it, it's garbage can 1, then it's garbage can 2, and then it's garbage can 3, and I keep going. And I keep deleting the history and saving the file. And again, that deleting the history kind of cleans it, and saving the file gives you a whole variety of iterations of whatever it is you're building. And where this is extremely helpful is if a file becomes corrupted, you can go back to the previous file and you've only lost about 15 minutes. If you work for 4 hours and Maya goes down, you just lost 4 hours and you can't come back from that. Does that make sense? So just as an insulatory move, again, saving about every 15 minutes, delete the history, clean the file up, and then save it with a different name. You've always got a backup and it's only 15 minutes away. What's also nice about saving incrementally like that with a series of objects is you might be building something and you go in one direction or one approach to building it and you go, you know what, it's not going where I want it to go. It doesn't look right, it's not working, it's not doing what I needed to do. You could go back a little bit and then go another direction rather than starting brand new. So there's all kinds of benefits to, again, saving your files about every 15 minutes or so with a number and, you know, in each subsequent number in the sequence so that you have a whole bunch of models you can go back to if you need to. And very handy. But let me show you this deleting the history and why we do it. In terms of where do we see the history, you'll notice that when you are in the channel box underneath your transformations under the shape node, you'll see there's a whole collection here. Again, everything that you've done, Maya writes it down. It's sort of recording it and remembering it for you. And it's unnecessary, so you get rid of it periodically and you don't have any problems. So for example, let's say I've got this cube here and I use my insert edge loop tool on it. So I use the tool on it and I'm making these cool shapes. Yeah, awesome. That's groovy. I couldn't be happier with what I'm making. Woohoo, yeah. You know, whatever the heck that is, I finally made it and I'm going to turn it in because it's fabulous. And what you'll notice is when you look at that object, when you go over here again, when you're in the channel box and you scroll down, you'll see, oh yeah, here are all of those things that I did, all that history right up from when I started building this object straight through each of these processes that I put this object through. And again, that history is not necessary. You clear that off periodically. Now, that's a modeling idea. Now, when you get into rigging or setup, the process where we bind geometry to the skeletons actually relies on history, and in that instance, you need to keep your history. But as a modeling aspect of this project, periodically we just got to get rid of that because we really don't need it. Now, the steps for deleting history are very simple. Step 1, select the geometry in object mode. Got to be selected, got to be object mode. Then we go to the main menu item, edit, and you will see delete by type and history. Very simple to do this. So once I choose history, boom, you'll notice that when I select the object, all of that history is gone. It's all been erased. It doesn't matter. Now you might be panicking thinking, oh, does that mean I can't undo? No, not at all, because if I hit Z for undo, you'll notice the history comes right back on. So clearly that's not doing anything that inhibits you from being able to do something. Now, is it true that once you save the file, you can't open that file and then go backwards? That is true. However, even if you save a file with history on it, you can't go backwards after you close that file. So there's no loss there whatsoever. So there's no, you're not losing anything by getting rid of that history other than that ever increasing fear that that file is going to go down. Does that make sense? Delete history, a very smart thing to do. All right, so today what we're going to concentrate on, because we know a lot of tools in terms of modeling that we need, but what we can do is learn to model smarter, not necessarily harder, because you could stay up all night modeling and never sleep again, and we've discussed the issues that crop up from that. But there is actually diminishing returns on the quality of your work the less sleep you get. So there's definitely a point where you're doing more harm than good. So you do actually have to sleep. I'm working on that one. If I figure it out, I'll tell you. But you do have to sleep periodically. But what you can do is try to model smarter, and that means you're making more impact with less time. So what we're going to concentrate on today are some things that I can do to help model faster, some fun little tricks and ideas and concepts that can really help with that. Number one is when you're looking at objects that you're trying to model, look for elements of symmetry. Symmetry meaning things that are similar on one side versus the other, or elements that repeat, because those are very helpful because you literally only have to build some of something to build the rest of it. So for example, you could build just a portion of an object and be able to make the whole thing from just a portion. All right. Now, one of the tools that we can utilize to this end is the mirror geometry tool. Now, the mirror geometry tool is very cool because basically what that allows us to do is build one side of an object and then mirror it to the other side. And you will find when it comes to objects that are made by human beings, and honestly most organic things as well, typically we exhibit some form of symmetry, bilateral symmetry typically, meaning what's on one side is on the other side. Just for simplicity's sake, that is an easier way to build something. So in terms of the world and the universe around us, we just got to look for where does that symmetry exist. So for example, if you're looking at this mailbox, you could say to yourself, well, I could draw a line right here and the back of this mailbox looks just like the front of this mailbox. Now it's true, I've got this opening here that I'm gonna have to model, but the front and the back are very similar. And even the side to side, very similar, left and right. So if we can reduce the amount of work we have to do, that makes our jobs easier. So anywhere we can do that, that's a good thing. So we're going to practice using the mirror geometry tool with a fun little activity. Of course, you see Sarah, myself, and Marcus on there, so you know it's time to exercise. So let's go back to Maya. I'm going to set my project. Incidentally, can you guys all see the interface from where you are? I'm trying to make it bigger so that you can see everything. I just want to make sure. All right, so I'm going to go to File, and I'm going to set my project because that's very important. Set it to my activity file folder. And I'm going to go to File, Open Scene, and I'm going to select my mirror geometry activity. Open that bad boy up. All right. And what you see is I've got this file, and it's I've got these image planes in here of a mailbox. front view and side view, and I've built one corner or 1/4 of this mailbox. And something real quick I want to point out for you guys while I'm here. You'll notice that the mailbox in my front view is your standard all blue mailbox, nothing overly exciting about that. This mailbox looks like R2-D2. Now, as a modeler, do you think it really matters that the paint job on one is different than the paint job on the other in terms of modeling? No, not really, because modeling is shape and form. So the fact that the image looks a little bit different, when I get to the texturing process, I have to decide, do I want it to look like R2-D2? Do I want it to be blue, or do I want it something else entirely? But for modeling purposes, it doesn't make any difference. So here we are looking at the mailbox, and what I'm going to do is show you how to use the mirror geometry tool. And just to kind of make it a little bit easier to see what's going on here, I'm going to go to my show menu, and I'm going to uncheck image planes so that I can't see them in this view. They are still there. I didn't delete them. Each window has its own little show view, so you would have to uncheck anywhere you would not want to see the image planes. All right, now, in terms of the mirror geometry tool, I've only got to figure out really two things. One, I have to determine what axis my geometry is in, and then as a result, which axis do I want to send my geometry, the duplicate, into. Now, the way we determine it is pretty straightforward. If you look at your geometry you selected, I've got the move tool selected so I can see the arrows. That helps out a lot. But if you look here, my geometry is all on one side of this thick black line in the middle of the scene that I'm building, and it's on the side where the blue arrow is. So what that's telling me is this geometry is currently in positive Z. And I know it's in Z because it's the blue arrow. Blue is always Z. I know it's positive because this is where the arrow is. This side is negative Z over here. So I'm in positive Z. So if I want to mirror that, where am I sending it, do you think? Negative Z. Does that make sense? So very straightforward. I figure out where I need to do all this. So now I can actually try the tool. So the steps for using the mirror tool, one, select the geometry in object mode. Got to be selected, got to be object mode. If you go to mesh, you will see the mirror tool. And we're going to go into the options box because that's where we tell it what we want to do. And where we're going to do is we want to mirror it on the Z axis. So we have to choose Z. And then we're going to send it negative. If you needed it to go the other way, you would choose positive. So we're going to choose negative. And I want to combine it with the original. So the new piece that I make will be a duplicate that is attached. And again, sometimes you want to mirror something but not necessarily attach it. So that's a thing also, so just be aware. But in this instance, I do want to attach it as a single piece of geometry. So again, once I've chosen the correct axis, then I hit apply, boop, and then it makes me a new mailbox on that side, right? And how obnoxious is that when you're doing that analog, right? You're trying to draw something and make two sides look the same. Brutal, right? Yay for machines. All right, now I'm hoping that something went amok here because I'd like to show you an instance where, oh, it did, good. An instance where history does actually help. Because you might be thinking, why do we even record history if it, we just get rid of it every once in a while? Can't I just do that automatically? Well, sometimes you want your history to stay present, and I'll show you one of those instances. Now, if you look at this mailbox before and after it merged, right? Here it is, there's the piece, here's the merger. Would you expect to get that shape? Why not? What's wrong? What looks wrong? And you don't have to use like the perfect verbiage here, but what do you see happening? What's that? It's tapering together, right? It looks like it's pinching. Something happened. And if you looked at that geometry before, you would not expect that to happen. So something went amok. So here's where I'm going to ask you to put on your thinking caps and think all the way back to Monday, which was like 1,000,000 years ago, right? What do you think happened there? Ooh, I think I like where you're going with that. Anybody want to add to that? Because you're on the right path. We do have vertices attaching to each other. We learned a tool last class that does that. What was the tool we learned last class? The merge tool, right? And the most important element of the merge tool was what attribute? Threshold. Very good. So threshold's the problem. Now, let's take a look at this object. Again, this is not what I wanted to have happen. That doesn't look right. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go into the history of this object. I'm going to find Sarah Connor and kill her before she gives birth to John Connor. No, I'm going to find in the inputs the mirror that I just did. And when I select it, I see all the attributes for that mirror. And one of those attributes, merge threshold. What was my merge threshold set for? 3 something, right? Okay, 3 is a kind of a big number, 3 grid units. What did we use as a number so that mergers that we didn't want wouldn't happen? 0.001 or 0.01. So let's plug those in. 0.001. Okay. Before, after. Is that not the shape you would have expected if I used the mirror tool? Okay, so here is an instance, and there's not a bunch of them, but there are instances where history is helpful because you can go back in time, as it were, change an attribute, and then everything works out just fine. Does that make sense? Just be very careful of the time-space continuum. Okay, so there's an instance where history was pretty cool. So I'm going to do another, but I'm not going to tell you the settings. You tell me, because I've totally forgotten. I had a soy chai tea latte and my mind is scrambled now. So what axis is my geometry in? Well, I got a couple of different things here. Let's take a poll. Let's see where we're going with this. How many of you think that my geometry currently exists in positive y? Okay. How many of you think my geometry exists in negative y? Okay. How many of you think my geometry is in positive x? Okay. How many of you think I'm in negative x? Okay, interesting. So in terms of my geometry here, I am in positive x. So I want to send it to where? Negative x, the opposite side. Does that make sense? You only have to see it once or twice, and then it's like, yeah, I got it. So now we're going to mirror it into negative x. So again, the steps are what? I forget. Select the object. Options box. X. Make sure it's set for negative, and I do want to attach it to the original. And then when I hit apply or mirror, either one, boop, I get my other mailbox. And so I really only had to build a quarter of this thing, and I've got the rest of it. So that's pretty quick and easy, right? Okay. Any questions on the mirror tool? Again, this is a pretty handy one for making duplicates. Again, most things that are made by human beings exhibit symmetry. You just got to figure out where it is, and you can use that to save yourself a lot of time, including just making adjustments to one side and then just keep mirroring it. You know what I mean? Rather than fight with both sides to make a match. So, tremendous time saver with that mirror tool. All right, let's take a look at another one. This is a fun little tool that allows you to not only duplicate things, but it also records transformation information, movement. So you don't have to just duplicate something, you can also move it and have it remember exactly how much it moved. Now, to give you an idea of where that might be handy, Let me go to my buddy Google. All right. Now, let's say I'm modeling that. A new tricycle, 24-incher. Okay? Now, you and I both know that since this was made mostly by a machine, it is perfect. So if I build a spoke, the way you and I know how to build a spoke, if I have even one of those things out of position, it's going to look terrible, right? It's got to be perfect or it's going to be obvious because of the pattern. Does that make sense? So wouldn't it be the nuggets if you could model one spoke and duplicate it and move it into position and then tell Maya, every time I duplicate it, make that thing again and move it that same amount so that every one of them would be created in perfect adjustment to each other. So you'd only have to make one and it would fill in all the rest. Would that not be cool? So here's another super handy tool. It's the Duplicate with Transform tool. And again, it's super fun, super easy to use, and it does a lot of neat stuff. Now, in terms of the Duplicate with Transform tool, like I said, it's not really difficult to use, but there is sort of a touch to it or a finesse, and that's what I'm hoping we're going to pick up today. Now, what I want you to remember are these three values. Translate X, 0.3. Translate Y, 0.3. Rotate Y, 7 degrees. All right. Now, what we're talking about is we're going to make a spiral staircase. We're going to make one step. And then we're going to make another step by duplicating it and moving it. And what we're going to ask Maya to do is move it up a little bit, 0.3 in Y, move it back a little bit, 0.3 in X, and rotate it just a smidge, 7 degrees. Does that make sense? Maya will remember all of that. So each subsequent duplicate will give you the exact placement of the next step. So here's what I'm going to do. In terms of the duplicate transform, of course, I got to open that activity. Luckily, my project is still set, so all I have to do is go to File, Open Scene. And I can find my duplicate with transform activity. No need to save that one. All right, so here's my step, step 1. So what I'm going to do is go to Edit, and you will see Duplicate with Transform. So I'm going to use that, duplicate. So now as soon as I make that duplicate, Maya is now recording all of my movements. It's like a recorder. Instead of recording sound, though, it's recording how things move. So what I'm going to do, because you can see here, I don't have step 1 in my hand anymore. I have step 2, the duplicate. So what I'm going to do is for my translate X value, I'm going to put in 0.3 and then hit enter to solidly enter that information. So it's moved back a third of a grid unit. Now I'm going to move it up a third of a grid unit. 0.3, enter. So now it's up. And then I'm going to go to my rotate Z and I'm going to plug in 7 degrees. Didn't want to do it. That's fine. I'll just rotate it myself. Oh, I'm sorry. I put it in the wrong axis. That's why. Sorry about that, Maya. That's what I wanted. Y axis, 7 degrees. All right. So now my new step is in the new position. Now the cool thing, or one of the cool things about Maya, is there's a hotkey in there for repeating things. And if you want to do something and you want to do that thing again, some things are repeatable. You can use the G key, as in George, to do that. So I just did a duplicate with transform. So if I press G, I get another step, and it has that additional transformation information. So I'm going to hit G again. And what I can do is, as many times as I press G, I'm going to get another step, and it's going to be offset just like all the previous steps. Now, usually, if anybody has a problem with this particular tool, it's because in the process of moving things around, they let go of whatever it is they were selecting, like clicked off into space, clicked on something else, used regular duplicate, and that won't work as well. So what you want to make sure of is that you never deselect the object in question, and you're always working with the duplicate. So I'm going to do it one more time so you can see it, but this time I'm not going to use the inputted values. I'm just going to move it. So I've got my duplicate with transform activity, right? So number one, I select the step in object mode, edit, duplicate with transform. So now I've got the duplicate in my hand, step 2. I'm going to use my move tool. I'm going to move it up a little bit. I'm going to move it back a little bit. And you'll notice I've never let go of that step. I still have a hold of it. I'm not changing anything, right? I'm just moving it, right? Put a little rotation on it. Okay. Now that it's in position, now I hit G. And each step will do the same thing as I did to that first one. And as long as I press G, it'll keep making duplicates and it'll keep adding up those values. And I can make whatever the heck that is. Does that make sense? Again, very handy for aspects of something that are highly repetitive, like if you're putting rivets on something, or chain links to a bike, spokes, links to a tank tread, anything where you got the same thing going on again and again and again, and you don't want to model it, move it, duplicate it, position it perfectly. You want that to happen without you having to interact. Does that make sense? Super fun. Yes? Yeah, just go back, delete the duplicate, select the original, and do it again. Yep, if you just happen to click off into space or whatever, that's where Maya loses track of where you are sometimes. Not always, but sometimes. And it's like, I forgot what you did, sorry. And it won't do it. And you'll hit duplicate and it'll just be a duplicate sitting there. All righty, how you guys doing with this? Good? What's that? Yep. All you have to do is select the object in object mode, go to edit, duplicate with transform. Now I have my duplicate. Again, that's what's in my hand. I'm not clicking off into space now. I'm still holding on to the duplicate I just made. And then I just move it. And again, as long as I never let go, nothing weird happens. It's a lot more predictable that way. So now, again, I still haven't let go, but now I can press G and it will continue to make the adjustments that I made to that first one. And as many times as I hit G, I'm going to get another duplicate. And again, it's a touch thing. You kind of have to get a feel for it. If it didn't work the first time, don't panic. Just give it another try. You will get the hang of it. Not a hard tool to figure out, but there is sort of a touch to it, and you have to learn that. But not awful. All right. Let's talk about poly counts a little bit. You hear this a lot, poly counts. What's a poly count? What the heck is the point of that? Well, here's the deal. In our world, we love to measure things. Feet, gallons, inches, miles an hour, cubic centimeters, gigawatts. We measure everything. So how do we measure polygon objects? Because they don't, light years, another measurement. How do we measure polygon objects when they're kind of points in space inside of a computer and don't really exist, really? How do we measure those things? Well, the way we do that is we literally count the number of faces on the object. It's poly count, and that helps us measure the complexity. So we can build things with whatever level of complexity we wish. However, in some instances, we have to know specifically how many polygons or polygon faces are on a specific object. For example, if we are building assets for a video game, right, something that's going to go into a game engine, there are actually things that we call poly limits. Movies take all the time in the world. You know, movies can take a year or more to make. That's because they got all the time they want. Movies don't open for a long time. So we can take as long as we need to create the images we need for the movie we're watching or going to watch. Video games have to create images for us instantly. We call that real time. So if things are being drawn for us instantly by the computer, they have to be pretty simple drawings. Does that make sense? The more complex the drawing is, the longer it takes to draw. The difference between you and the computer is the same in that instance. I mean, the computer's a little bit faster, but same idea holds true. More complexity, more time. So if I want something to draw very quickly, there are limits to how quickly your game can draw what you're looking at. And that's why handheld games, the graphics are not as good as the big games. Big games have bigger, faster brains, and they can draw more quickly, and therefore the graphics you can see are better. Handheld's the opposite. So if I'm building an asset, it's going to depend what platform it's going to be used on, what game it is, what game engine it's running on. But one of the things that they're going to be very concerned with is the poly count of the object, because you can only have so many things within a scene and have it drawn instantly. So that's you have lag when your computer can't draw quickly enough. Does that make sense? I know you've seen that in games that you have that are way too cool for the system you're running it on. You got to shut some stuff off or it doesn't work right. So point being, it all has to do with how quickly your computer can draw. So we do need to know what our poly counts are, particularly for video game asset construction. So how do we measure it? By counting the polygons. The good news is we don't have to do that ourselves. We can actually ask Maya to do that for us. If you look at your main menu set display, under display, heads up display, poly count, you can actually turn on these numbers here, which will pop up and tell you the number of faces, the number of vertices, edges. It'll count that stuff up for you, so you don't have to worry about, you know, how many faces do I have to count them up myself. Maya will do it, and it'll give you 3 categories, you know, how many selected, how many in the scene total, how many am I looking at right now. And when you look at faces, that's the poly count. So if somebody tells you, I need you to build Ahsoka's lightsaber and it needs to be under 500 polygons, then as you're building it, you're watching those numbers and you can't go over 500 or it won't work. Literally, the game won't run. Does that make sense? Okay. Then they don't have to put a limiter on you. It's more of something you're conscious of while you're doing the work. Does that make sense? There are tools in 3D applications that reduce polygons. So you could build something and say, hey, could you reduce this by 30% or whatever? But the problem you run into there is, well, what 30%? Because it's just going to take it at random. So it's going to wreak havoc with your model. So typically, we just have to be more conscious of what our poly count is while we're working. In the instance of asset production, or any instance where the amount of polygons on the screen would affect the real time and how it's being used. Yeah, good question though. That's okay. Was there one other one? I thought I. Okay, good. Cool. Just wanted to make sure you had it. Yeah. Well, yes, no, they have different tools again that reduce the amount of polygons you have. When you're talking about ZBrush though, you can talk about different levels of detail. You know how we talked about primary, secondary, and tertiary forms. Well, in ZBrush, you can literally say, show me this in its most complex level of detail. Now show it to me at a medium level. I mean, you can like just adjust it on the fly while you're doing it, which is impressive. But ZBrush is less concerned about things like edge flow. And that's, you know, you got to go back in and fix that stuff. But exactly. So it's really dependent on what it is you're trying to do and whatever pipeline you're in. You know, how do these things come together that decides how you do it. But yes, it's the same idea in that we can jump up and down through poly limits or poly counts based on the density of the geometry. But yeah, those are all very similar ideas for sure. All right, good questions. All right. Vocabulary. We got another periwinkle vocabulary component called pivots. So, oh yes, pivots affect the functionality and movement of objects. So we need to understand how they work and how we can change their location, because where the pivot is actually determines how the object moves. So for example, if you take a look at that door without even being an engineer, without being an OSHA representative, which way do you think that door opens, in or out? Circular. Nope, not circular. Meaning the door opens inward or the door opens outward? Unless you're working in a restaurant, they typically don't go both ways. What would your definition of it going outward? My definition of outward meaning if I walk into that door in this direction and push, it will open towards the hallway. Outward, absolutely. And the answer is outward. And there's a couple of hints. You know, the first one is if you look at the top, you see that little thing that makes it slow down when it opens and closes, so it's not too fast. That's kind of a giveaway. But the biggest is the hinges, right? Because if you can't see the hinges on a door, then it opens outward. And that's the way doors work. Whichever side the hinges are on, that's the way the door opens. So doors open on pivot points, and that's what those hinges are. So depending on where a pivot point is, absolutely dictates the function of the object in question in terms of how it moves. So what we're going to talk about is how we can adjust the pivot point on objects so that they can move properly. Because what we want to do in this class is we want to adjust the pivot points on objects so that they actually function. So scissors actually work, so that we can open the lid on something and close it. We're actually going to build this stuff so that it could be animated. Make sense? Okay, let's look at pivot points and how they work. All right, pivot points. I'm going to go to File, Open Scene. We're going to do a new activity, and it's going to be my my hierarchy activity. Okay, so here I am, and I'm looking at these two really cool doors. Now, let's take a look at the more simple of the two doors. Let's say I want this thing to open. Doors typically swing, so I'm going to use my rotate tool to simulate that. And what that's showing you is where the pivot point is on the door. And pivot points are basically usually in the middle of the object. You select something, by default, the pivot point is in the middle. So when I go to my rotate tool, you will notice that the door rotates from the middle where that pivot point is. Now, some doors do pivot in the middle like that. You know, if you've been to some shopping malls and stuff like that, they do have that spinning door of doom. You know, there's always somebody who's not pushing. They're trying to go through and make everybody else do the work, or some kid who's blocking it, you know, and driving you crazy. But point is, the door spins in the middle like this. If I want to change where it pivots from, I'm going to have to move the pivot point. Now, if I show where my pivot point is and I try to move it, the object moves with it. So what I want to do is have the object be stationary, but the pivot point move. So I can accomplish this using the D as in David key. If I press D, I go into edit pivot point mode. Once I press D, now I can actually move the pivot point of the object without moving the object itself. Be very careful not to touch the rotate capacities, because you will change those as well. I just want to move the pivot point in terms of its placement. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my orthographic views, because they give me a more accurate look at whatever it is I'm looking at. So I'm going to move to the side here, line it up as well as I possibly can with the edge, right? And then I'm going to go to my top view, and I'm going to move that to the back corner. Now, once I get my pivot point where I want it, then I press D again, as in David, and then now my pivot point is in this position. And now when I go to my rotate tool, that door opens outward like that. that make sense? All right. So here's what I want you to do. I've got this other door over here. It's a pretty cool vault door. And there's a couple of parts on it, and they don't work right. Number one, the door spins in the middle, which if you're a vault, that's not a very effective means of keeping the bad guys out. So we need to change that pivot point. Also, we have this locking mechanism here, which pivots from this point, which is also not ideal. That thing should be really spinning in place. I've also got this really cool handle, this locking mechanism, also not pivoting properly. So what I'd like to see, Brian and I are going to walk around real quick and see you guys do this. I want you to change the pivot points of those three things. Change the pivot point of the door, change the pivot point of this locking mechanism here, and change the pivot point of this handle. And we will watch to see your adjustments and see how you're doing with that. We are moving the pivot points so that they will function better. And again, I highly recommend you use your orthographic views to make the adjustments because it's much easier to line things up using those views. When you make adjustments in the perspective view, depth is a bit of a deceiver. It's very helpful to move those pivot points in your the safe. Yep. The door itself needs to pivot properly. The locking mechanism needs to pivot properly, and the handle on the door needs to pivot properly. Hierarchy. Yep. How you guys doing? Pretty good? Good. Good. That's okay. It takes a little bit of practice. Don't be afraid to move it again. You can move that thing as many times as you wish. It's not a competition. How we doing? Looks good so far. Looks like you got it. Very cool. Looks like you guys are doing pretty well with that. Yes. Yep, the handle pivots from the sort of the head. So as long as you've got that there, you're going to be just fine. Perfect. Excellent. You got it. Very good job. All right, I'm going to adjust the pivot points of mine really quickly, and then don't close this file because we're coming back to it. Because we're going to do some other stuff with it, because you've probably noticed that the pieces don't move together, and that's what we're going to talk about next. How do we make that happen? Because that is also important. All right. So let's talk a little bit more. You're probably noticing that when you move the door, the handle and the locking mechanism don't move with it. And that's frustrating because, again, we're talking about polygon geometry, which until we give it or assign it dynamics of any kind, it doesn't really have physical properties. So how do we get this stuff to move together? Well, we are going to use an idea called hierarchy. And hierarchy is a very simple concept, but from it, that's how we actually get into all the higher concepts of setup or rigging, the process where we build skeletons that enable us to animate things. But it starts with these baby steps of hierarchy. Now, hierarchy works along the idea that as long as you have something telling you what to do, and it's only telling you one thing, and that thing that's telling you what to do is sort of above you in the chain of command, then you can do it. That's what hierarchy is, following instructions. And hierarchy, again, it kind of looks like a tree. It's like a family tree. You know, your grandparents tell your parents what to do. The parents tell the kids what to do. The oldest kids tell the younger kids what to do. There's a hierarchy there, a chain of command that dictates who can and who cannot tell you what to do. So as long as you've got a clear hierarchy and one set of instructions, you can do it. So if your dad says, wash the car, your mom says, mow the lawn, let's do what mom says. Exactly. Smart guy. But point being, that's two sets of instructions from both of them being higher than you, so it doesn't work. So you got to have one set of instructions from one person higher than you on your hierarchy telling you what to do, and you can do it. It's very easy. Hierarchy within Maya works the same way in terms of controlling motion. Now, in terms of setting up a hierarchy, again, it looks a lot like a family tree. We literally create a relationship between objects, and they're connected to each other. This is a look at what we call nodes, because Maya is a node-based application. To give you an idea, Maya or Photoshop is a layer-based application. Everything is on layers. Got a whole bunch of layers, and what they represent are like pieces of paper that are on top of each other. And when you're looking down on all the layers, that's the final image that you see. It's sort of a composite of a series of 2D concepts. They all come together. Some of them blend, some of them react, some of them don't. But it's all about looking down on a compilation, if you will, of image components. That's a linear or layer-based concept. Maya is a node-based concept. So what that means is things are not on top of each other in layers. They go in any direction you want. You just kind of connect it on top of it. So it works much more like Legos or Lincoln Logs or an erector set. You know, everything's attached to it and it can go in any direction. And that's how this hierarchy works as well. We can take these nodes or the icons that represent objects and connect them to each other. And incidentally, in terms of a node, these nodes are just icons, and there's a, you know, you have to name the node, of course, and then there's like a little image in the corner that tells you what that is a node for. And this little symbol means polygon geometry. So if you looked at the nodes, you would know what it was that node went to. Now, we can connect these nodes to each other, and again, they allow us to control the way things move. Let's take a quick look at some of those ideas. All right. Now, I've got an object here. It's a polygon cube. If I want to see the node for this polygon cube or the hierarchy, I can go to Window, General Editors, and Hypergraph Hierarchy. And I get this window right here. And you can see Polygon Cube 1, that's its name, which you see here in the channel box. When an object is selected, it's yellow. When it's not selected, it's not yellow. I can select it out in the main interface and it selects in the hierarchy, or I can select in the hierarchy and it selects in the main interface. Like all windows in Maya, they're all showing you the same thing, just from a different perspective. Sometimes literally, sometimes figuratively. Make sense? Okay. All right, so that's the node for that cube. So let's take a look at making things move together. I'm going to actually hide my grid because it's a little easier for me to demonstrate stuff if that's not in there. So I'm going to hide my grid, and I'm going to show you hierarchy with these two objects. And again, hierarchy, the whole concept is making things move together. That's all. So if I want these two objects to move together, something that I can do is select them both. It's pretty easy. I can select one object, hold shift, and select the other object, and they will move together. All right. Now, something important to note, a couple of key visual cues here. Number one, when I select an object, Maya lists the name of the object in the channel box, pCube1. If I have more than one object selected, I get one of the objects and then ... That's an indication of more than one thing is selected. Okay? Now, another thing that's interesting about selecting multiple objects is if I select two objects, you'll notice that they are two different colors. Very strange thing about Maya is if you select multiple objects, the last object you select will be green and the others will be white. What that is showing you is what we call selection order. What did I select last? Well, that's the object that's green. The other ones will be white. Make sense? Okay. Now, if I select the two objects, they do move together when I move them. But watch what happens when I rotate them. When I rotate the objects, they move at the same time, but they have their own pivot point space. Does that make sense? They have a sense of individuality. They are singular entities, but they do move in unison. Right? All right, let's take a look at what that looks like in the hypergraph hierarchy. Two objects selected. Make sense? Okay. Let's look at another way to make these things work. Another way to make them move together. We're going to use a process called grouping. Now, grouping is a weird idea because we typically think of groups visually. You know, these are fast cars, these are planes used in combat, these are varieties of pizza I would never eat. You know, there's usually, when we think of grouping, it's kind of stuff like that. But in Maya, grouping is a physical thing. It actually dictates how things move together. Now, grouping, it's kind of a weird process. But let's say I want to group this marker to this eraser. The grouping process is basically like the creation of an invisible box. So what I do is I take these two objects, and I'd like to turn that around. I'm going to take these two objects and I'm going to group them. So I put them, they're in my Maya scene. My marker's not cooperating. There we go. I put them in my Maya scene and I group them. You're grouped. And the way it works is they can still move. They still have their sense of individuality, but they're in this invisible box. So what happens is while they're in that box, if I pick up the box, they have to go with it because they're in it. They can still move, but they're inside this invisible box that governs overall control higher up on the hierarchy. Does that make sense? Let's take a look at that. So I'm going to grab one object. This is the process for creating a group. Grab one object, hold shift, grab another object. The order is not important. Edit, group. All right. Now, a couple of things are different. What do you see that's different from what we had previously when I had what seemed like two things selected? Both of them are green, right? That's definitely different. So something else is going on here. Okay. What else is different? The pivot point, right? It's over here. What else? There's one more. Look in the channel box. The name. What's the name of this thing? Group 1. It doesn't mention cube or sphere. Group 1. Let's take a look at what this looks like in the hypergraph hierarchy. Here's the hypergraph hierarchy window. Okay. I've got pSphere 1, right here. I got P cubed 1, and then I got group 1. Now I can move the cube and I can move the sphere, just like I can move the sphere and I can move the cube out here. But as soon as I select the group node, I move them both. And watch what happens when I rotate. Does that make sense? The group is absolutely in charge of the cube and the sphere, because that's where they're pivoting from. Does that make sense? All right. Now, another interesting phenomenon, both of these objects are lighting up green, right? That means selected. We talked about selection order, right? How could they both be last? They're not both last, but what you are seeing is if you select an object, if there are other objects in its hierarchy, they light up as though they're selected, but they really aren't. They're just showing you that they're in the hierarchy of the object that's selected. So because I have group 1 selected right now, they both light up because group 1 can tell them what to do, right? But they're not really selected because look, they're not yellow in here, right? That's what selected looks like. That's what selected looks like. That's what both of them selected looks like. But once I go to the group, both of them are green. Absolute control by the group over both the cube and the sphere. Now, I can take things out of groups if I want to. I can hold down the middle mouse button, which gives me the green plus of power, and I can drag off into empty space and let go. And this node has been removed. It is no longer part of the group. I can also add things back to a hierarchy. Same process. Hold down the middle mouse button, drag and connect. Now this cube is now part of the group. And it doesn't matter if the nodes are physically over each other. The group tells them both what to do. It is in charge in here as well as out here. Yes. Ah, yes, you're starting to put these things together. We're going to have to establish a hierarchy to make that door work. I'm going to show you one more process, and then we're going to do just that. We're going to find a way to make it work, because there's more than one way to make things move, you know, like there's more than one way to skin a cat. And who spent their days figuring out how many different ways there are to skin a cat? Sick monkey. All right, so let's take a look at other ways to make things move together. Incidentally, if you do something to an object that is in charge, you do that to everything that it's in charge of. So for example, I can select the cube and hit delete and it's gone. If I select the group node and I hit delete, both are gone. So whatever you do to the head of the group, you do to everybody they're in charge of. All right, let's take another cube and another sphere, and we're going to look at another idea. And this is called parenting. Parenting is also a process to get things to move together. As its name implies, we are creating what we call a parent and child relationship between objects. One parent can have many children, so that holds true in Maya as well. So point being, when it comes to making things move, parent-child, what you have to establish is which object is the parent and which object or objects are the child. So if I want the cube to tell the sphere what to do, I make the cube the parent. And whenever you're setting up a parent-child relationship, you always select the child first, because that's how Maya figures it out. Remember I told you selection order is a big ticket item? So whatever you select first will be the child. Whatever you select last will be the parent. So if you select 50 things, 49 of them will be child of the 50th. So you got to be aware of that when you're setting up that parent-child relationship. We've only got 2, so it's a little bit more straightforward. If I want the cube to be the parent and the sphere to be the child, sphere doing what the parent says, I select the child first. Then I hold shift and I select the parent. Now I go to edit and I choose parent. All right, now the cube still, or the sphere still moves by itself, but when you select the cube, they both light up, and you'll notice it doesn't even mention the sphere in there at all. The sphere gets no billing whatsoever, but it is absolutely under the control of the cube. So the sphere says, buy me an ice cream, I want a transformer. And the parents say, we are out of here. All right. And again, if you take a look at that hierarchy, you can see it. The cube is in charge of the sphere. Cube is in charge of the sphere. I can disconnect that, move it, connect it so the other way around. Now the sphere is in charge of the cube. And again, where they are in space doesn't really make any difference. It's all about how they're connected to each other. Make sense? Okay. So with our door, if we want the handle and the locking mechanism to move with the door, we can use either of those possibilities. Actually, you could even use both of them if you wanted to, but it's all a function of getting to the hierarchy if you're using the grouping aspect. So if I wanted to make the door work through grouping, I could select the handle, select the locking mechanism, select the door, and then group it. And then all I would have to do to make them all move together is make sure I edit that pivot point for the group, because the group makes everything move, and put that pivot point where it should be using the D key, and now they all move together. Whoop. And now they all move together, right? Tricky thing about grouping is getting to the group node so you can make everything move together. Sometimes it's hard to get it. So for example, you can select the door, you can select the handles and the pieces, and you're not moving everything together. You have to get to the group node. Now, in terms of getting to the group node, all you have to do is what we call, well, you can use the hypergraph hierarchy if you want to. You can go to the hypergraph hierarchy and just select the group node there, and then you're already there. But something cool that you can do is if you select one object in a hierarchy, if you look at your keyboard, you see those arrows in the lower right-hand corner? You can do what we call pick walking the hierarchy. So if I select something in a hierarchy, I can use the up arrow to get to the next highest tier on the hierarchy and just jump right to the group node. So I don't have to, come into the hypershade or the hypergraph to find it. So that's one way to make it move, using grouping. I can also, if I want to, use parent-child. Now in a parent-child relationship, we always choose the child first, but if I'm trying to set up a parent-child relationship, who's the parent and who's the child on this door? The door is the parent, because I want the door to swing and take the locking mechanism and the handle with it. So what I would do is select the locking mechanism, select the handle, select the door, and then edit parent. And then now when I select the door, everybody moves with it. But here's an interesting idea. What happens if I want, for my animation, I want Superman to fly into the vault because there's people in there who are desperately low on oxygen, right? The teller and the bank manager are in there. And I want Superman to grab this handle right here and rip the door off the hinges and save everybody. Well, then who's the parent and who's the child? The handle is what? The handle is a parent because I need the handle to control the door. Does that make sense? So you have to look at how do I want these things to move, because that dictates the hierarchy it will require to make that happen. Does that make sense? So if I want the handle to be in charge, then the door and the locking mechanism have to be child of the handle, so that when I grab the handle, Superman can just rip that thing right off of there and they all go. Because for that animation sequence, that's what I need. Make sense? Hell yeah? Okay, good. I bet you thought you were only going to learn modeling when you were in this class. All right. Now, oh, well, we just did that. Sorry, we just did that activity. Make those things move together. So let's take a look at your skill check for this assignment. Lecture 5 skill check. We have a really cool vehicle for you to build a rig or set up using hierarchy to make it function. It's affectionately referred to as the zombie kill bus. So let's take a look at the zombie kill bus. This is a skill check item, so I have to set my project to my skill check folder. Set project, skill check, file, open scene, and this is my hierarchy project. All right, so what we have is wheels on the bus that go round and round, but they don't follow the bus all over town. We'll have to have a special session. But the problem is, I want these wheels to move with the bus. I still want them to spin on their own pivot points, but I want to be able to grab the bus and the wheels go with it. So one of the many ways I could do that is parent-child. So if I want the wheel to travel with the bus, then the wheel is the child and the bus is the parent. So I select the child first, shift select the bus, edit, parent. So now when I select the bus, the wheel goes with it. And again, as I promised, you can select many objects. Whatever you select last will be the parent when you do the parent-child relationship. And again, you could group it to make all the pieces work. That's fine too, to get the bus for the wheels to follow it. Here's where it gets interesting, and this is the part you're going to have to work on. This bus has an alter ego, and that's where it got its name, the zombie kill bus. If you look, you see there's a layer here, and if you click the V for visibility, you will activate the zombie mode for the zombie kill bus. And you'll see we've got, this cool armor over the windows so the zombies don't smash through the glass and get you, because they love to do that. We've got these really neat spikes on the wheels, which are great for clipping down zombies that are shambling alongside the bus. But the coup de grace, literally and figuratively, is the saw blades for killing both tall and short zombies. Now, the problem with all this stuff is we don't have a hierarchy. So what happens is if I drive the bus through Zombieville, I don't have any protection. So what we want to do is we want to set up a hierarchy and a functionality to this bus so that it can do its job, and that is to safely bring people from one area to another through throngs of ambling zombies. So in order to do that, we are going to have to first set up pivot points. I'm just going to give you that as a hint. You want to do your pivot points first, then establish hierarchy. Because if you do hierarchy first, it gets much harder to separate the pieces again and then figure out their pivot points. So we're going to have to adjust the pivot points to affect functionality. To give you an idea of what I'm talking about, let's go to the swing arm for the zombie kill blades here. All right. Is this the way that piece should pivot in order for it to work? No, that's not going to do it. It should raise and lower it, right? Like you would see on the front of a garbage truck. So that's not going to fly like that. We've got to figure out how to move that pivot point so that that thing moves properly. Once every piece has the correct pivot point, then we have to establish a hierarchy. Who's in charge? Do we do parent-child? Do we do grouping? Do we do both? And you can use all of those together or separately to make all the pieces move. But that's your mission. Reattach all the pieces of the zombie kill bus and make it so that that thing can move properly and function. Make sense? Hell yeah? Okay, yes?
What about the saw plates? Do we have to make them rotate as well?
Absolutely. Every piece has to function. So you got to figure out, how do I make all these pieces move together the way they need to move? Are the pivot points in the right place? Do I have the right hierarchy? Think of it like a toy that you're playing with. You know, what do I have to grab to make it move right? That's kind of the fun part of rigging or setup. It's not quite as arbitrary or seemingly arbitrary as some of the other disciplines. Rigging or setup is basically build a machine to make an object work. So if it works, you did it right. There's not a lot of, you know, did you do it the most efficient way or the easiest way? I guess you can argue that. But if you like to take things apart and put them together, you like to fix things, rigging or setup might be a job calling for you, because that's a job, setting up the rig or the skeleton that enables things to be animated. And it's a lot of fun, again, figuring out how to make stuff work. And what's cool about it is you test it. If it works, then you did it. If it didn't work, okay, I got to try something else. So if you're sort of a methodical mindset and you like to build things, that could be for you. Just to give you an idea of where you can go with that, let me show you. All right, here's a character, and you can see that it's got a, you know, it's like all this weird controls on it. And if I hide the polygons for a second, what you see is the skeleton that actually makes it go. And it uses the concept of hierarchy in order to make things move, right? And we get all kinds of fun little things we can do in terms of making a character move. Right? All right. We can control the hands and the arms. We can make neat controls that enable us to, let me hide the joints for a second so you can see that a little bit better. Build controls for the hands. We can make controls that make it so that your character can see. Open and close their mouths. But these are all controls and systems for rigging or setup that help you to animate things and freak out Brian. And just in case you were curious, here's the hypergraph hierarchy on this thing. It is not a transformer. It's a lot of nodes. But that's all hierarchy. It's just setting things up to control each other, figure out who's in charge. There are other various little fun rules in there, constraints and stuff like that. But it's all based off of what we talked about here. And that's a whole job. There are people who do just that. Yeah. Nope. Grouping is its own thing. Again, it governs movement. Layers are an organizational idea. That's a good question. I would assume so. I would assume so. I'm not going to say for sure, but try it. That's what I say. If you're not sure, try it. The worst thing that'll happen is you get the spinning rainbow wheel of love, and then Maya goes night night, and you just launch it again. Welcome back. Here we go again.
My memory is I gave the tablet is good memory. How do you display the hierarchy again?
Window, general editors, hypergraph hierarchy.
All right, thank you.
Yep, that is just one of many windows that shows hierarchy. Actually, another window which I showed you day one the outliner. That's also hierarchy. You can see that one. Just a series of clicks and drop downs. That shows you a hierarchy as well. So you can look at hierarchy there. This is just visually, it's a little bit easier to wrap your head around, I think, but it's just hierarchy. And that particular window shows it that way. But it's pretty neat. Woo! Yeah, Brian. Woo! That's rigging, that's hierarchy, that's setup. And that is a job. So again, some people really like that. All right, so set up your zombie kill bus, make it work. And that will be your skill check for lecture 5. All good? Hell yeah? Awesome. All righty, get to it. I will see you guys again on Friday. We will have another lecture. It will be super fun. And we will be talking about, if I remember right, isn't it materials on Friday? I think we're, yep, materials. So we'll be talking about materials and coloring materials and making adjustments. And these are sort of the baby steps towards texturing. So that's going to be a lot of fun. Again, a little bit off of modeling, but fun and helpful and things you should know how to do. Oh yeah, hotkeys, that's true. Speeding up your workflow, more tips and tricks on how we can use those. So that's a good one. All righty. Absolutely. Absolutely. You can group things, you can parent things and move the pieces around. It's much easier. So yeah, a lot of this stuff is really helpful. And that's why we give it to you in the order that we do. So actually helpful, believe it or not. It's not just random. All righty, guys. So I'll see you on Friday. Have fun. Good lecture. I will see you then. Get that stuff done. Bang it out. Oh, no, thank you, Brian. As always, you were fabulous. Oh, and my laptop was not charging. That thing could have gone